Hello, I'm Leyton Clark, and this is number 0660, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0660. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, Marc Raboy, author of Looking For Alicia, The Unfinished Life of an Argentinian Rebel.
Before coming to Montreal, my grandfather actually went to Argentina. So when I was planning this trip, on a whim, I Googled Raboy, Argentina. I'm just wondering, maybe he had relatives there. And all this stuff came up about Alicia. She's one of 30,000 who had disappeared during the military dictatorship of the 70s. But her case has had, over the years, quite a lot of attention, mainly probably because her partner was a very, very famous figure in Argentina, and he was murdered in the incident where she was kidnapped and never seen again.
Reisa Schwartzman is the Chief Play Officer of Gridley Games, a company that makes educational STEM and STEAM games for kids. Where did the name Gridley come from?
I actually bought into a company that had a great game called Gridley Heads. But the name Gridley is a grid that along a playing field, and so the playing field includes everybody. And so the idea is that we are a company that includes everybody in our games, and we really try to make all of our games and our STEAM kits a collective opportunity where families can play together and learn.
Ernie Smith from the newsletter Tedium talks about seatbelts.
It was at first something that was looked at for use in trains, which, in the U.S. we have Amtrak, and I'll tell you right now, Amtrak trains do not have seatbelts. It was actually something that was checked out before the automobile, but sort of came to prominence probably mid-century in the 1950s or so. It was seen as a safety feature, but one of the challenges that the industry kind of ran into was that safety is not exactly something that sells vehicles, or at least at the time it didn't.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, and of course, an idiot of the day. The guest later, the person who told you this was show number 0660, was Leyton Clark, who was a civilian employee with the Edmonton Police Service. I worked with him back in the day when he was the director for Global News in Edmonton. He directed remotely when I anchored Global News here in Montreal. Thank you very much, Leyton, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make the show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. Environmental officials in Kentucky said a mysterious white foam that covered the surface of a creek was finally identified.
If it had a mind, you could reason with it. If it had a body, you could shoot it. If it had a heart, you could kill it.
Danny Robinson said he and his wife were finishing dinner at their Lawrenceburg home when he looked outside and noticed a stream of white foam in Cedar Brook Creek.
Now, man is no longer the supreme being on this planet.
Robinson thought that this was unusual, that it wasn't right. He watched the foam grow thicker.
The organism is growing at a geometric rate. By all accounts, it's at least 1,000 times its original mass.
Within 15 minutes, the whole creek went from a few inches to a foot of thick foam. Said Robinson, "We gotta make some calls. This is serious."
Life form that hunts its prey. Predator.
John A. Mura, head spokesman for the Kentucky Energy and Environmental Cabinet, weighed in.
I want that organism alive.
He said investigators determined Glomar Pet Products Incorporated in Lawrenceburg had a release of dog shampoo that entered a storm drain and ended up in the creek. Said Mura, the stream was measured for dissolved oxygen and pH, and there was no apparent effect on wildlife. Dawn Duncan, vice president of Glomar Pet Products, said the spill is the first of its kind in the more than 20-year history of the business. She said the dog shampoo is coconut-based and would not pose a danger to wildlife or the ecosystem. Well, that's what she says. But do we know this for a fact?
The blob. Terror has no shape.
Yes, my thoughts exactly. A grandmother in Pennsylvania is accused of threatening a Hollidaysburg police officer with what she calls white witchery if he didn't drop her grandson's felony drug charge. 74-year-old Celestia Barker III of Williamsburg is accused of calling Hollidaysburg police to ask an officer to drop the felony charges against her grandson, saying he only had a small amount of marijuana and a pipe. She allegedly told the officer that she practices witch activities and he'd be in jeopardy if he failed to drop the charges. Barker then gave the officer examples like him falling downstairs and feeling like someone pushed him. She said she wasn't threatening anyone, but just making statements, according to the charges filed. When state police questioned Barker, she replied, "Yes, I did do that. Is there a law against it?" After being told that there is a law against it, Barker then explained to the trooper that she practices white witchery and that they best be looking over their shoulder.
Ooh, witchy woman, see how high she flies.
Well, she won't get off the ground if they keep her behind bars. Either that or transport her back in time to 1692 Salem. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, this next story comes to us from John Mao at our news desk at WLSL-LP-FM in Dade City, Florida. Thank you very much, John. A prospective juror for the sentencing of Florida school shooter Nicholas Cruz told the judge she wouldn't have time for her civic duty because she's both married and has a sugar daddy. You may remember that Cruz, the Parkland gunman, pleaded guilty in October to 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted murder in connection with the massacre that took place on Valentine's Day at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School back in 2018. So, now it's up to the jury to decide whether he gets life in prison without the possibility of parole or gets executed. During the proceeding, Circuit Judge Elizabeth Shearer asked whether she had missed anyone with concerns or questions. One juror, identified as Miss Bristol, chimed in. Here's the conversation between the beleaguered judge and the potential juror.
There's dates in July that you're not available. What are those dates?
July 7th, July 4th, which is closed, and July 18th. But then again, I need to figure out something. I have my sugar daddy that I see every day.
I'm sorry?
My sugar daddy.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, but
well, I'm married and I have my sugar daddy. Okay. And I see him every day.
All right, ma'am, we'll come back to you, okay? Thank you.
Miss Bristol was dismissed, which I'm sure is to the delight of both her husband and her sugar daddy. Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff All program, shall we? Marc Raboy is the author of Looking For Alicia, The Unfinished Life of an Argentinian Rebel. It's the biography of a radical young idealist who disappeared in 1976. Marc is a writer and emeritus professor in the Department of Art History and Communication Studies at McGill University. He joins us via Zoom from right here in Montreal. Hi, Marc.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Thanks for being on the program with us. Now, I understand that you first came across this story because the person we're talking about, the Alicia involved, actually shares your surname.
That's right. And I discovered her completely by accident because I was planning a trip to Argentina, which was really just supposed to be tourism, as I often do. But in this case particularly, I had an interest in Argentina because, my grandparents were immigrants to Canada about 100 years ago. But before coming to Montreal, my grandfather actually went to Argentina. And then he went back to Ukraine, or Russia, as he called it at the time, and came to Canada. So when I was planning this trip, I just, on a whim, I Googled Raboy, Argentina, just wondering, maybe he had relatives there. And all this stuff came up about Alicia. I mean, if you actually Google Raboy, Argentina, that's the most prominent thing because her case although there were, she's one of 30,000 who were disappeared during the military dictatorship of the 70s. But her case has had over the years quite a lot of attention, mainly probably because her partner was a very, very famous figure in Argentina, and he was murdered in the incident where she was kidnapped and never seen again. So that's what first attracted me to this. I mean, and the other thing was that it turned out that Alicia and I are the same age, or would be the same age. I mean, she was born a month before me. Both of our fathers came to the New World as children. I mean, her father ended up in Argentina. My father ended up in Canada. We were both students during the 60s. We were both involved in the kinds of things people were involved in the 60s as students. Both became journalists, and then our paths diverged. And, she ended up the way she did. We don't even know how she ended up, really. And I'm here today. And, one of the things that it was really chilling to think, what might have happened to me if my grandfather had stayed in Argentina, and if Alicia's father had come to Canada, maybe she would be here having lived a happy life, as I have. And maybe I would have ended up like she had. So that's really the start of the story.
Beyond the surname, is there any other connection? Are you two actually related, or did you not find that out?
Well, we did, in the course of the work, actually from the beginning, became quite close to Alicia's brother, who is still very much around in Argentina. On my first trip to Argentina, I met Alicia's brother, and and we both had a similar kind of interest in family history and exploring this story. And of course, he had a direct interest in, he spent 40 years looking for Alicia, we could say. And so we did a DNA test, and it turns out, we are very distantly connected. There is we do have a DNA match, but at the level where, maybe we're fourth cousins, which means we would have a common great grandparent. But, that became less and less relevant as I got into the story, because there were so many other parallels aside from the blood connection. The generational connection was very much that. One of the things that I really ended up thinking about a lot was, what was really going on in the 60s and the 70s. There was Alicia in Argentina, and I was, here in Quebec, and it was a much less globalized world than it is now. But we still, we still knew, and we were about, and were influenced by what was going on elsewhere. And so very much so, as I mentioned, the generational connection. That's probably mostly what we have in common. And then there is the blood connection. The fact that we were both second generation immigrants, we were both from immigrant families, I think had a lot to do with it. And interestingly enough, as I said, our fathers came as small children. Our mothers were actually born in the New World, although in both cases of Alicia and myself, our four grandparents were all European immigrants.
Besides the personal connection you feel and you have felt to Alicia and her family, what made you decide that this was something you needed to write about and share with the world in your book, Looking for Alicia?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's sort of in the nature of who I am and what I've done. I've been writing in various guises really since I was an adolescent. As I mentioned earlier, I was a journalist, and then during my academic career, I did a lot of writing. I've never stopped doing journalism. Occasionally, when I had the opportunity, and it was such a compelling topic. For me, this was the way I could grapple with the topic of who was Alicia and what were these points of common experience that I was trying to get to, was writing about it. And actually in the process of writing, I discovered all sorts of things which I was not aware of when I started out. I won't give you a spoiler alert here because I want people to read the book, but there's the writing process itself and also the research process that accompanied it and that led to it was really fundamental to me, and it's just taught me a lot about myself.
Well, without giving away any spoilers, you say you've done a lot of research, so this was a mystery of a woman that has been missing for over 40 years now. I'm just wondering if what you had to do in researching this book and putting this book out, has it moved the needle any bit when it comes to whatever happened to Alicia?
Yeah. I have to say it has not moved the needle on the fundamental point of what happened to her because, there are people in Argentina with a lot more resources than me and very strong motivation who have been trying to solve this mystery for a long time and have been unable to. I mean, one of the things that I go into in the book, I had a long meeting with a federal prosecutor who has spent his career going after, perpetrators, of murders and torture and disappearances in Argentina. And, and he had to tell me, sitting there shaking his head, we don't know what happened to Alicia, and we can't find out what happened to Alicia. The only hope, I think, well, there are two things. I mean, there are people who know. I mean, there are 4 men who have actually been convicted and are doing time for the murder of Alicia's husband and for the disappearance of Alicia, because this happened in public, in a public space, in the street, in front of witnesses. People saw it happen, but no one knows what happened after that. There is a glimmer of hope that someone might say something one day, although the political culture in Argentina is such that people do not talk about what they did during that time. And the other glimmer of hope is that still every year in Argentina, remains are found. And there is a database where Alicia's brother and her daughter have given their DNA to. There is we can always hope that one day remains will be found that will match the DNA of Alicia's brother and sister. Certainly with my own resources and capacity, I've been able to ask a lot of questions. I met and spoke to just about everyone who is still around who actually knew Alicia at the time. So I think I've painted a picture of her. And that was really one of my goals. My goal was not to find out what happened to her. I didn't really expect that would happen. It was more of who was she? There is a really interesting quote from an Argentinian Nobel laureate, Pérez Esquivel, who said, we always look at how they died. We don't look at how they lived. And that's what I was trying to do. I wanted to know, who was this woman? Because, she had a life. As I say, it's an unfinished life because she was 26 years old when she disappeared.
When you look at the parallels of her life and your life, not just the commonality of your last name, but so many parallels the two of you have, in doing the research, did you kind of learn also something about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. As I suggested, one of the things was, Alicia was a member of a revolutionary organization, the Montoneros. She was dedicated to radical political change in a context where, in a context of military dictatorship, a very kind of sketchy, history of democracy. Argentina has gone from the type of democracy that we have to complete authoritarian situations and back and forth over the past 100 years. Right now, happily, it's in a democratic period, which has lasted since the 1980s. But prior to that, there was this oscillation. So Alicia was in a kind of political organization. I was never in a political organization. And I looked at the kind of question like why was that? And how would I have acted in her situation? And I was able to grapple with that a bit, but of course we never know. You never know how you're going to behave until you're actually right in the midst of it. And this is one of the things, and that the people who knew Alicia at the time were able to tell me, her commitment was, she was totally committed to political change. She was fearless. There was nothing more important to her than the cause that she was devoted to. She was disciplined. She was critical. So in every step of the way, it did give me the opportunity, almost the obligation to say, am I fearless? I don't think I'm fearless. I think fear can be a great demotivator. And certainly, again, the people, some of Alicia's fellow travelers who I met at the time said, I couldn't have done what she did, and maybe that's why I'm here today and she's not.
Well, let me ask you this question, and again, we'll mention the title of the book, Looking for Alicia, The Unfinished Life of an Argentinian Rebel. But before I let you go, we have got less than a minute. I've got to ask you this question. One of the things the two of you have in common is the fact that your roots go back to Ukraine. And yes. I've got to ask you your thoughts on, especially when you consider what her life was all about and fighting for justice and fighting for democracy, your thoughts of what's going on in your family's and her family's homeland now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question as well, because again, in recent days, in thinking about Alicia and thinking about myself, and I really do feel, maybe it's a conceit, but I do feel that if I were in Ukraine today, I would not have any problem, being part of the resistance to what is going on there. I have absolutely no doubt that Alicia would be in probably much more militantly than me perhaps. But it's such a sad history because as I mentioned in the beginning, why did our families leave there 100 years ago? I mean, our families were Jewish country people, fleeing from pogroms. I mean, they didn't really have much of a choice. So it's a very sad and painful story. And I actually did visit Ukraine in the 90s at the time when they had just become independent from the Soviet Union. And it was a very hopeful time, I have to say. And now, I wonder about some of the people I met back then, whether they're even still alive and how they're coping.
It's a very trying time. Again, the book is Looking for Alicia, The Unfinished Life of an Argentinian Rebel. Marc, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Thank you for doing it. I appreciate it.
Marc Raboy, author of Looking for Alicia, The Unfinished Life of an Argentinian Rebel. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0660, and you'll find links to Marc's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/TheStuffFile program. From Montreal, Canada, and spanning the globe like a butterfly on speed, this is The Stuff File with Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk about some educational games, plus we'll delve into the history of the seat belt. We have an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now, on a program also heard on Stitcher Smart Radio, the smarter way to listen to radio. Well, the night shift workers at the Mr. Chips French Fry factory in New Zealand received a bit of a shock as 28 tons of russet potatoes from a farm in nearby Matamata worked their way through the factory conveyor belts. What appeared to be just another muddy potato was discovered to be a World War II-era hand grenade. Said the factory's operations manager, the guys were really calm and collected, and they reacted in an extremely professional manner. Police responded to the scene and subsequently called upon the New Zealand Defence Force's Explosive Ordnance Disposal Team, who removed the grenade from the facility. X-rays revealed it was a training version of a hand grenade containing no explosives. The operations manager hopes the police will return the grenade to the company when their investigation is complete so they can put it on display in the factory's trophy room. Wow, they have an interesting concept of what is a trophy. By the way, potatoes don't usually explode unless you put them in the microwave without poking holes in them first. It may not be Easter yet, but Mr. Bunny is already making it into the headlines. In Brandon, Manitoba, a 27-year-old man was in the process of robbing a business on March 31st when an employee tried to thwart him. But the thief was armed with a Mr. Solid brand chocolate Easter bunny, which he used to hit the employee. The shoplifter escaped, but was found nearby and arrested. The employee suffered only minor injuries. The stolen merch was returned to the store. No word on how Mr. Solid fared. By the way, was there nothing more depressing as a child at Easter than getting one of those hollow chocolate Easter bunnies? Give me a solid chocolate or just get away from me. Yeah. Rachel Mulcahy is in trouble with Clonard Monastery in Belfast, Northern Ireland, for apparently posing as a nun and disrupting services at a church on April the 3rd. In recent days, she has been served with an injunction to stay at least 150 yards away from the building, but the bogus nun says she is praying for its parishioners. Mulcahy is also known around town for dancing frantically in the streets to religious music, accompanied by two evangelical preachers playing musical instruments. She sometimes falls to her knees and shouts, "Christ, come into me!" and said that she is in love, head over heels. "I can't stop it. I love Jesus Christ so much that all I can think about is him." But one insider claims she is not a nun and said the congregation is quite elderly and they felt intimidated by Miss Mulcahy's behavior. They just want to be left alone to pray in peace. In other words, they want none of her nonsense. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, a judge has ruled that 21-year-old Xavier Matthews is not eligible for bond after his arrest in Jacksonville, Florida. Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Lonnie C. Miller Senior Regional Park to find Matthews lying in a ditch covered in blood, but telling deputies he was fine. Investigators say he had been shot but wasn't a crime victim. Witnesses said he had been trying to break into cars at the park and had accidentally shot himself in the groin. The gun, deputies say, was stolen from a man who had given Matthews a ride. He was also wanted on 2 robbery warrants. Matthews is being held on multiple charges, including armed robbery, carrying a concealed weapon, and violation of probation from a previous case. Well, this is what happens when you go off half-cocked. Anyway, let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Gridley Games is a company based in Vancouver that has an unwavering commitment to create amazing games that engage kids with STEAM content. STEAM is an acronym for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics Education. Reisa Schwartzman is the Chief Play Officer at Gridley Games, and she joins us via Zoom from Vancouver. Hi, Reisa.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the program with us. This is an interesting concept that you guys have started with Gridley Games, and I want to go back to the beginning just with the very name. What is Gridley?
Well, that's always a good question. I actually bought into a company that had a great game called Gridley Heads, but the name Gridley is a grid that along a playing field, and so the playing field includes everybody. And so the idea is that we are a company that includes everybody in our games, and we really try to make all of our games and our STEAM kits a collective opportunity where families can play together and learn.
So how many games do you have, and what was the first one you started with?
Well, we started off with the Gridley Heads games, which were a strategy game, and those came in sports. There was soccer, hockey, and racing. And then we went into our more traditional games. And so we have about 8 games, and we have 8 kits. So with the first 3, I think we're about 21 products now, working on a few other things too coming up.
And when it comes to creating games that have the content you're looking for, what's the process that's involved in game making to make sure that they cover the various bases that you want to cover as far as education is concerned?
For me, education is best learned when it's experiential. So we want to make sure that we're creating an experience through the play that engages everybody who's involved. So we're always looking for products that have engagement or play that has engagement. And through play, you have so much more joy, and through joy and experience, you have good memory. So that's kind of where we start from. We come up with a basic concept, and then we try to build everything around it. So our kits, our STEAM kits are not traditional games. They're more interactive activities, both science experiments and art activities. And so we jam our products with tons of different, both art and science. So they're all experiential learning. When it comes to the actual gameplay, we want to make sure that each of the games has a meaningful experience that they can take away, whether it's a game. We have a game called Show Me the Quan that is a word game that's not a great it's good for people who aren't great spellers. I'm not a great speller. I'm more of a mathematician. So for me, that's a great opportunity to engage kids in spelling without them feeling intimidated. Our Wise Alec is a family game that has questions in arts. Sorry, not in arts, but in science, in math, in history, and in spelling. And it has multiple levels of play, and it has a really fun twist to it where you can do mind teasers and tongue twisters and things that promote healthy and active lifestyles. So again, there's that experiential learning. You have to get up and get going and try different things. So we try to make all of our games multi-level, multi-interest, and a lot of family fun.
Well, speaking of levels, do you create games specifically for children of a certain age, or are these games that can be played by all children and even adults?
We have a wide range of ages. We have our youngest game is for 4 and up, but the majority of our games, I would say, are from 7 and up. And as long as it's good gameplay, really anybody should be able to play our games. I had college-age kids who were playing my Wise Alec games just with their friends, not with adults and not with children. And they took a glass of wine and they really enjoyed the game because it's based on school curriculum, and it's always fun to see how much you remember from your day school days.
So let's go back to the earlier ones. Again, you say you create games that are for 4 and up. What are the kinds of games that you would play with a 4-year-old?
So we have Wise Alec Jr. Wise Alec Jr. is actually 4 games in one. It has a matching game, a counting game, a storytelling portion, so charades. So again, it's teaching some of the basic skills that they need to go from preschool into elementary school, and pretty much other than cutting paper. So we play with sight words. We have engagement with storytelling where they have to do problem solving and creative thinking. So everything we do, we try to make it multi-level as well as engaging in their ability at their level. So at a 4-year-old, they should be able to be pretty creative, and it really expands their word selection and understanding of body parts and understanding words and numbers and how they all come together. So it's a great little game.
I would imagine that your kits are great, not only just for home use, but also for home schooling. But when it comes to schooling, do you sell some of your games to schools themselves?
So from a homeschooling point of view, we know that a lot of homeschoolers, we have a large homeschooling distributor that we know does really well with our games. So we know homeschoolers love our games. From a school perspective, I have a lot of teachers who say they keep a lot of our games in their toolbox, and that, you know, if they've just finished math, they'll pull out one of our games. We have a game called Rocket Lander that's 3-dimensional graphing, and pull out that one. When it's after English, maybe it's Show Me the Quan or Wise Alec because it's more word-based. So we definitely have games for every topic. We've got oversight, so after sciences, they might pull out that game. So we offer enough support for the teachers that they love having them in their classrooms. They also use them in after-school programs because a lot of them are good for all ages. They can have them in their after-school classes or before programs so the kids of all ages can play together.
Fantastic. Now, what are the costs of these games, and how can people get them?
So first of all, you can get them online on our website or Amazon, and a lot of your stores hopefully have them, and if they don't, let them get a hold of us. They range anywhere from $16 to about $35.
So very economical. And I also understand that your kits feature instructions in English, French, and Spanish.
Yeah, most of our products are in English, Spanish, and French. We believe in being multicultural as much as possible and being open to learning as well. So there's platforms to support if you're learning French at home or English or Spanish. The games can help that as well.
And how widespread is the popularity of your games? I mean, you're a Canadian company, but are you selling worldwide?
We actually are now. I'm excited to say that. We've moved into Europe. I think we're in about 7 countries that I know of, or 8 countries that I know of. So we're really excited to see our growth this past few years.
What is your background? Are you somebody who's always been into games?
So my parents, my dad's an engineer and a builder, and my mom's a dietitian, and science was always something that was in our house all the time. we always engaged in play and games. I mean, lots of time was spent around the kitchen table with games together, playing with my sister, playing with my parents. So games were always something that we enjoyed doing. I have a degree in exercise physiology and psychology, believe in play a lot. I love the idea of play, how it motivates people and how much you can learn from play. And I believe in experiential learning because the things that I remember best out of my experiences at school were things that were hands-on learning. So we've tried to bring all of my life experiences, being a mom, being a grandmother now, of watching how kids learn best when they're playing is what we try to bring out to our company, Gridley Games.
I mentioned at the opening your title of Chief Play Officer. Is that what your business card actually says?
Yes, it does. We try to always remember that play comes first. So
that title on your business card is a title that we should all aspire to.
Well, I never feel like you're too old to play and enjoy life. So I think sometimes people forget that they're allowed to have fun, and it's toy business is not always an easy business, but we get to bring a lot of joy to a lot of people. So that's really great.
And like you mentioned when you were talking about games being played by some teachers in school, it almost sounds like when a particular class is over and they bring out these games, that you kind of trick kids into learning.
You don't have to trick kids into learning if they're having fun, because they actually love learning. And the idea is while you're learning, you actually retain the information. And when you're having fun, you just retain better.
Absolutely. Reisa, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
It was great meeting you all, and look forward to sharing our Gridley Games with everybody. And thanks for having me.
Reisa Schwartzman, the Chief Play Officer at Gridley Games. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0660, and you'll find links to their site. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holden.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestuffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestuffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Peter Anthony Holder here. Often I mention my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. I also often mention that I'd like you to become a patron of the Stuff File program via patreon.com. Well, this is my opportunity to combine both of those pleas to you. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. Well, if you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. By becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you do become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book for your e-reader. So join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up today at patreon.com/thestuffileprogram.
Available on Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and just about every other way you stream audio. This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's radio that's everywhere you want to be, and some places you don't.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk about seatbelts, plus we do have an Idiot of the Day coming your way, and we have a few more Stuff File news stories to share with you here on the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. By the way, eagle-eared listeners probably have already noticed that the opening and closing theme song to this show has changed. The opening theme song changed just this week. The closing theme song changed last week. They are now both the same. Before the change, the closing theme was Stink by John Lurie from the Get Shorty soundtrack. And if you go back to the first time it was used on this show, back on my old radio show, that theme song has been part of the show for now 20 years. So actually it was over 20 years. And as for the opening theme, Soulful Strut, which was first by Young Holt Unlimited and then updated to the version by Grover Washington Jr., it was part of the opening theme song for over 30 years. So it was time for a change. The new theme, by the way, is called Woodshed Kid by Flash Fluharty. So there you go. We are moving forward, as it was. And speaking of moving forward, let's get back to the stuff. Tired of mild winters and modern conveniences? Looking for a new gig? We know just the job for you. The UK Antarctic Heritage Trust charity is accepting applications for seasonal positions at its Port Lockroy base in Antarctica. The base is in need of personnel to take on several duties, including running a post office and monitoring penguins. I hope that's 2 jobs and not 1. Anyway, other open positions include base leader, shop manager, and general assistant to work at the gift shop and the post office. From November of 2022 to March of 2023, the base was established in 1944 and is located on Goodyear Island in the Palmer Archipelago, which is west of the Antarctic Peninsula. Besides average seasonal temperatures of minus 10 degrees Celsius and minimal hours of darkness each day, living conditions for the workers will include limited power with no running water or internet access. Job seekers outside the UK can apply, but they have to have the right to work in the UK. The deadline for applications is 7:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on April the 25th. So, good luck. Well, if you're one of those people who always says they just need to get away, you can't get more away than this without leaving the planet. And electric vehicle charging stations in Isle of Wight, England, were hacked in the most middle school of ways on April the 6th. It seems someone reprogrammed the screens on the charge points to show a pornographic website instead of the ChargePoint Genie network. In a statement, the Isle of Wight Council said, "We are saddened to learn that a third-party web address displayed on our electronic vehicle signage appears to have been hacked." They apologize to anyone who may have found the inappropriate web content. Well, I'm just hoping that someone didn't get overcharged. Anyway, let's get to our last guest here in this edition of the Stuff All program, shall we? But before we do that, let's give a listen to this vintage jingle.
Buckle up for safety, buckle up. Buckle up for safety, always buckle up. Pull your seat belt snug, give an extra tug. Buckle up for safety, buckle up.
Buckle up for safety, buckle up. Buckle up for safety, always buckle up. Show the world you care by the belt you wear. Buckle up for safety when you're driving. Buckle up,
buckle up for safety, buckle up. Buckle up for safety, always buckle up. Put your mind at ease, tell your riders please. Get your seat belts buckled, everybody buckle up.
I'm old enough to remember that jingle when it played every day on my TV. I bring up that jingle because it's the topic for our next guest. Ernie Smith, the man behind the website and newsletter known as Tedium, which is subtitled The Dull Side of the Internet, is back. And this time he's here to restrain you. One of his recent newsletters dealt with seatbelts, so let's snap to it. Ernie joins us via Skype from Virginia. Hi, Ernie.
Hey, how's it going?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks for being on the program with us once again. So I knew a little bit about the history of seatbelts because that's something that we all learn about at some point when it comes to trivia. But you've done a deep dive on seatbelts. What did you find?
I found a whole lot about a lot of restraining stuff. Basically, it's a really fascinating thing, I have to say. I think that where I started with it was really one thing I sometimes run into when I'm putting it on a seatbelt is when I take it off, it goes all over the place. Or when I put it on, sometimes it just gets stuck. and I have to like roll it all the way back just to get it working again, and it's really annoying. It turns out that this is actually a safety feature of the seatbelt that is intended so that if for whatever reason you get into a wreck of some kind, God forbid, it'll basically stop itself so as to protect you. It's basically if there's sudden movement, obviously you want it to be secured, right?
So it locks in case of an actual incident.
Exactly.
But you also went back and took a look at the basic history of the seatbelt. So what did you find?
It's interesting because I think that one of the things that's really fascinating about it is it was at first something that was looked at for use in trains, which, in the U.S. we have Amtrak, and I'll tell you right now, Amtrak trains do not have seatbelts. And it was actually something that was checked out before the automobile, but sort of came to prominence probably mid-century in the 1950s or so. It was seen as a safety feature, but one of the challenges that the industry kind of ran into was that safety is not exactly something that sells vehicles, I guess you could say, or at least at the time it didn't. You would have companies that were basically just like, well, we're going to try to do things with safety, and then like a leadership regime changes, and all of a sudden, like the focus is on building fast cars versus safe cars. So it sort of turned into this situation where really regulations needed to be put into place to ensure that seatbelts were a standard feature of vehicles rather than a nice to have.
Well, I grew up in the 60s, so I remember that there were certain things that we now consider standard that were for safety reasons that didn't exist. You have seatbelts, you have backup lights, and also the right side exterior rear view mirror. Those were all options when I was a kid.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating how things that were once optional became sort of required by law, or they became industry standards, basically. And one of the great examples of this is what's called the three-point seatbelt, which is basically, if you're in the front seat, it's the one that you put on yourself that like straps you in from three separate points. It turns out that this was actually an invention for Volvo made by a man named Niels Bullen, who basically came up with this much more secure version of seatbelt, and it became the standard, not necessarily because Volvo convinced all the companies in the auto industry to pay it money, but because the company made the decision to essentially give the patent away for free, which meant that it was the best choice for like buckling the seatbelt, at least in the front seat of a car, was offered to the industry as something that would benefit everybody rather than just Volvo.
And nowadays you can get the three-point seatbelt in the back seat as well. So the only person who's going to be cut in half in a major accident is the poorest person sitting in the suicide seat in the middle.
Not exactly a fun place to be.
No.
It's interesting because innovations are still happening with seatbelts. One of the ones I highlighted in my piece was actually an example of a patent for a heated seatbelt, which basically it just has heat coils baked into the seatbelt, which if you've ever had heated seats, my wife has them in her Subaru. They're actually really nice. I'm kind of curious as to what it would feel like to have your seatbelt kind of like a tiny electric blanket on your torso.
Well, the last couple of cars I had all had heated seats, and again, it was something that was standard in the car, not something that was an option, because quite frankly, I would never use heated seats. I just don't like them. I never turned it on. How can I describe this? I just don't like dry roasted nuts. How about that?
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. One other angle of seatbelts that I think is actually really important to talk about here is obviously seatbelts are different in cars than they are in airplanes. This is actually sort of an evolution of sort of a divergence of, the two transportation types. Basically, automobile seatbelts were much closer to airline seatbelts, but then at some point, airline seatbelts basically stayed somewhat the same. Obviously, the use case is different. You're traveling much faster in an airplane, but it's also like, it's not like you're in a position where you need to have like a 3-point seatbelt on you at all times. So that's one factor there. But obviously, the other thing is not every airline seatbelt is the same length. They often vary in size significantly based on the airline you're with.
Again, the difference between the airline seat, the buckle, how you attach it. The car seats used to be that way back, again, in the day, but they've changed. Is there anything particular about the way you attach a seatbelt in a plane that differs for safety reasons than the mechanism you would find in a car?
One of the things that's really important in the case of a car vehicle, one of the things I mentioned in the piece actually is that my primary bag is a Chrome Industries bag. If you know anything about Chrome Industries, they basically have like a miniature seatbelt like as the strap with a belt buckle on it. It has like a standard press, and you press on it, and it just comes right off. Like if you're actually delivering stuff and such. Airline seatbelts, they use sort of a lift style that pulls straight up and comes off relatively easy when necessary. Which obviously, if you're like having to get up and like go to the restroom, not that that's exactly a desirable experience on the airplane. It's relatively easy to get up and move around because obviously the use case is a bit different. The reason why this changed in cars is because there was more need in the case of impact to prevent the belt from just coming off when there is a crash. It's sort of a safety mechanism, basically.
Yeah, and let's be honest, when you're flying at 500 miles per hour and you slam into a mountain, basically the seatbelt is just there so that you stay with the seat when your body is found.
A dark example.
Well, but am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
Also, I find the interesting point, you mentioned that seatbelts were first invented when with train travel, and that we don't see seatbelts on trains anymore, which is an interesting point. One can argue and debate whether they're needed or not. But the one thing that we don't have seatbelts on, especially considering when we're driving, it is now in most places required by law that you wear seatbelts. I still find it interesting that the one thing that doesn't have a seatbelt, which I think should, is a school bus.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think that one of the reasons for that, I admit that like I was curious about this, but I don't actually think I put it in my piece. I seem to remember that one of the factors that was involved with that is because a school bus like is so large. Yeah, there's basically this factor of if a school bus does get in a crash, like the seats in the back they will feel more force than the ones in the front, basically. So as a result, like it has safety risks of its own. So it's obviously an unusual thing to consider that like this bus, which is obviously carrying precious cargo, doesn't actually have seatbelts, which we've been taught are like a very important thing from a safety standpoint. But it's still, I have to imagine there have been a lot of attempts to fix all of this.
Well, as you say, one of the reasons they don't have them is apparently because the buses are large. And I bring you back to the original reason for a seatbelt, the aircraft. That's a little large, too. So I don't know the argument. Anyway, it's another fascinating piece from another fascinating newsletter that you put out. Ernie, thank you once again for being on the program with us.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Ernie Smith, writer of the website and newsletter Tedium. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0660, and you'll find links to Ernie's site.
Buckle up for safety, everybody, buckle up!
You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. I've got one more Stuff File news to share with you before we get to the idiot of the day, so let's get right to it. A 71-year-old man from Denver, Colorado, wanted to play pickleball by any means necessary. And now he faces a felony charge as a result. Arslan Gunny made a pickleball court without the permission of city officials after he allegedly remarked the ground of a basketball court at the Central Park Recreation Center with a Sharpie pen on March 21st. 3 days after the incident, an arrest warrant for felony criminal mischief was issued for Gunny. According to court documents, the senior caused $10,000 worth of damage to the basketball court. In addition to the warrant, Gunny also was notified that his membership with Denver Parks and Recreation was suspended. Well, at least he didn't slap anyone. But he's in a pickle now. Anyway, boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
47-year-old Jermaine Wolford was allegedly spotted on surveillance footage taking up to 18 rare turtles from Turtle Source in Estero, Florida. Owner Marcus Cantos said more than a dozen turtles were missing. Cantos said he had called the repairman to his store to fix a fridge. The turtle breeder said he noticed some turtles were missing after the first time that Wolford came into the store, but he didn't immediately make the connection. He checked store cameras and saw Wolford allegedly removing the turtles. Wolford claimed he had needed to pick up parts, and when he returned to the store, he was arrested by Lee County Sheriff's deputies. Said Cantos, "The camera is right up there, not hard to see, and the guy looked right into the camera, and that's how the Sheriff's Department was able to use the facial recognition, and he was just helping himself to all these turtles." Lee County Sheriff's Office deputies were able to recover 5 of the 18 stolen turtles from a house in Hillsborough County.
I love turtles.
Now why, oh why, would you steal 18 rare turtles from a room that clearly has surveillance cameras, which you looked directly into when stealing? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0660. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links in all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0660. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter as PA Holder. And don't forget to check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including kdxradio.com, truetalkradio.com, streaming on Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, and over the air on World FM in New Zealand, MediaCore in Singapore, WLSLLP-FM in Dade City, Florida, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, and local 107.3 FM in St. John. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. A tape of the preceding program will be sent to the Radio Hall of Fame, where it will be placed under the statue of Marconi, which is kind of wobbly.